Welcome to 6 Million Seeds. I'm Meryl Fury.
And I'm Carrie Bruno. We are healthcare professionals and co-creators of this podcast.
Today's episode of 6 Million Seeds is brought to you by Sliced Apples. Welcome to 6 Million Seeds. My name is Meryl.
And my name is Carrie.
And today we have the absolute thrill and pleasure of having a guest that we've heard about for so long, and we're so honored to have her here. Her name is Amie Hamlin, and she is the executive director of the Coalition for Healthy School Food.
Yeah, so I'll introduce Amie a little bit. So like you mentioned, she has served as the executive director of the Coalition for Healthy School Food since its founding in 2004. She previously was the director of 3 other nonprofits, 2 nonprofit environmental organizations, and a tobacco control program to ban smoking in public places. The Coalition for Healthy School Food was co-founded by Amie after she wrote a New York State legislative resolution for healthy plant-based entrees and nutrition education in schools, which passed unanimously in 2004. Amie has a master's degree in education and is certified in plant-based nutrition through E-Cornell. She is a mom to a college student, and in her spare time, Amie operates Growing Peace Farm, a small veganic farm outside of Ithaca, New York. Welcome.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. And I am also so honored because I love the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think our missions go well, just hand in hand, so beautifully, so beautifully. So tell us a little bit about the Coalition for Healthy School Food. What is that exactly?
So we are a nonprofit organization. And as you said in the bio, we started the organization after I introduced and got passed a New York State legislative resolution. This is not a law, but it's a recommendation. However, it's introduced and voted on the same way laws are. And this was in 2004, and it passed unanimously. And so after that, a small group of people and I decided we should start a nonprofit now to implement the recommendations of the resolution. So we pretty much started out in New York State, but we have expanded and we help schools everywhere in the country now. And the work that we do involves sort of 2 major aspects. One is to actually get plant-based food on the menu. And just to define plant-based, the food industry has been hijacking that term. But what that term means and is supposed to mean is 100% plant-based, i.e. healthy vegan would be another way to say it. So I just want to make sure when people hear me talking about this, I do mean a 100% plant-based and not what might be called plant-forward or flexitarian, where our focus is on getting 100% plant-based, because there's one thing that kids and adults don't need more of, and that's meat and cheese and eggs. You know, they don't need more of that. They need more whole plant foods. So our focus is to get these plant foods on the menu. Of course, fruits and vegetables have to be on the menu too. We're talking primarily about the main dish, the entree. And so we develop these recipes and we work with schools to get them on their menus, which may involve some training for the cooks as well, and some training for the food service staff about how to market them and why we should care about having these, why it's so important. And one way we find effective to get the food service staff to care is to bring in speakers like doctors and dietitians and people who can help them understand their own pain points. You know, because 7 out of 10 people in this country are overweight or obese. And that is not to in any way fat shame, but it does harm people's health to be overweight or obese. And most people who are don't want to be. And then also high cholesterol, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and many other health conditions caused by diet. So when we talk about those issues and people are really relating to those issues as we're talking, they're understanding how it impacts them, and it's making them understand more why we want to do better for our kids. And so for the kids that they serve, because one thing I will tell you about food service staff in schools is they care deeply about the kids. They don't really understand that the regulations and the food that they are being given to work with is not always the healthiest. They don't necessarily understand that. So these people are very dedicated people who care deeply about their careers. They care deeply about the kids. And wow, during the pandemic, they have just been the biggest heroes. I always considered them heroes, but the biggest heroes during the pandemic, they've been feeding kids and families. They were delivering food to people's homes by bus, you know, while the kids were learning at home. And really, with so many people losing their jobs, you know, this was truly a lifeline. And so even though the food wasn't necessarily what we wish it was, it's people deeply, deeply caring about the kids that they serve and their families. And so helping them learn more about this topic is really important work. And then the other aspect of what we do is education of what we call the whole school community. So this means not just the kids, but all the adults who work in the schools, plus the parents and caregivers of the children. So this would include teachers, assistant teachers, administrators, school nurses, custodians, you know, anybody, food service staff, anyone who works in the school. And so that's the other aspect. And how do we do that? Well, we have announcements that are read over the loudspeaker each morning. That's wellness wake-up call, nutrition education in the form of easy to digest sound bites. And we have 30 different topics. That's a 3-year cycle, 10 school months a year. Each month is a different topic and comes with a healthy plant-based recipe. And then we encourage the schools to send that home with the to the parents or caregivers and review the messages with the kids. And our secret hope is that now the parents or caregivers are also learning it, and then to make the recipe together. These are really simple, delicious recipes. So that's one resource we have. And another resource is called Feel Good Food Cards, and these feature plant foods with 5 interesting facts, and not necessarily nutrition facts. A lot of the facts are just interesting facts. And and then 3 different pictures, you know, sort of a studio shot, and then what does it look like when it's growing, and then some other image like in a recipe or some close-up or abstract or beautiful picture of the plant. So these can be used, food service staff use them in the cafeteria to show what's on the menu. And then there's instructions for playing a lot of different games or a lot of different learning activities. So that's another resource that we have. And then finally, we have curriculum. So we have a pre-K through 2nd grade curriculum. And then for the other grades, we have family and consumer science curriculum. And then for high school, normally we bring in speakers, all different kinds of speakers, food and race, food and the environment, food and immunity, all different things. So that is essentially what we do.
That's quite a bit.
Yeah, that sounds
That's a lot.
You know, I have a question. So I know here in Kenosha, and actually you may, I don't know if it got out as far as New York State, because you're in Ithaca. Excuse me, but since the whole pandemic and COVID thing came to life, and you know, we've had the change in the way school food is now delivered.
Mm-hmm.
Every child gets offered free breakfast and free lunch. And I think that's nationwide, right?
Yes, it is. It's because the school meal program is a federal program. It's administered by the states, but it's a federal law and federal regulations that govern it.
Right. So here, what we actually had was the quality of the food really seemed to decline when the pandemic precautions plan system, I don't know what you want to call it, was put in place for school food. We actually had a sophomore in one of the high schools here created a petition to have the local school board look at the quality of the food.
Mhm.
They were finding, let's say it was ham slices, and we're in Wisconsin, so there's always cheese, always, and that's probably everywhere, but probably even more so here. So let's say it's ham slices and cheese on bread. They were actually finding mold and rotten spots on the ham. Spicy chicken breast sandwiches where the chicken wasn't really cooked. It was basically raw. And they've been dealing with that sort of crisis here in the school food. So I'm wondering what you're seeing and what you work with when you're in a school system and you're trying to deliver either wellness wake-up calls or the feel-good food cards, or you're in there, you're trying to make a difference with the food. How has it changed since COVID started? Is it harder to make a difference? Are you seeing any different kinds of stumbling blocks or challenges?
Yeah, I think situations like what you described happen occasionally. I don't think it's, necessarily a regular occurrence, but I do think that when all of a sudden schools had many more mouths to feed than they were previously, and they had to, especially at the very beginning, really ramp up their production while everybody was feeling pretty terrified about going to work and being in person and being safe. And then also a lot of this food was going home on buses and being delivered. So sometimes the food was actually raw and there was instructions to cook it, and sometimes people were not reading the instructions. Sometimes the food just wasn't fully cooked. I mean, various situations like that happen. And I think sometimes when you're in large food service kind of operations, sometimes stuff like that happens. Sometimes things are overlooked by mistake. I mean, obviously nobody wants to feed kids moldy food. So sometimes it's just a matter of somebody's not looking carefully enough, right? And I think also because there was more focus on school food, then if anything negative did happen, it probably got more publicity. So no food service staff wants to feed kids bad moldy food, number one. And number two, I mean, first of all, because they do care about the kids a lot. I consider them to be heroes. They work super hard and they don't necessarily understand that what they're feeding the kids is not really so healthy for them. Because what they're doing is they're following the USDA regulations given to them for reimbursable meals. They're meeting those guidelines. And so you would think if you're given these guidelines and you're meeting them, you would think that's a healthy meal. And what they don't really understand is it is, other than the milk, it is possible to make a school meal super healthy with the regulations as they are, except for the milk situation. But other than that, you can make a very healthy school meal. But really the standard is the standard stuff: pizza, hot dogs, ham and cheese sandwiches, chicken nuggets. It's a lot of really same old stuff all the time across the country. A lot of school menus look very similar, and people don't know. I mean, I think most food service directors don't know that processed meat, and I don't mean chicken nuggets, which is a processed, yes, it's meat, it's a processed food. It's not considered processed meat. Processed meat is a group 1 carcinogen known to cause cancer in humans, according to the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization says it because there's thousands and thousands of studies that show this in, medical research journals. So it's really not in question. So most food service directors don't know that they are serving food that can cause cancer in humans. And this includes processed meats. It doesn't mean something like a highly processed food like chicken nuggets. It means things like bacon, sausage, pepperoni, deli meats, any of the deli slices. And it doesn't even matter if they don't have the nitrates in them. or nitrites. I always forget which word it is,
Mhm.
but it doesn't have to have those ingredients added for it to be carcinogenic. That may be one of the reasons why, but it's not, they actually don't know what actually makes it carcinogenic, actually. So, and there's also like a natural celery juice that can be used. That does not make it less carcinogenic. So processed meats are processed meats and they're carcinogenic. I'm not saying celery juice is, it's some sort of celery juice. It's some sort of celery juice extract, which is high in those things. And so some companies felt like, oh, well, that comes from celery, so therefore
Must
it
be
wouldn't,
okay.
yeah, it must be okay, but it's not. Those are still processed meats that use that. So I think, again, most food service directors just, they don't understand this. And like, if you don't serve kids deli meats for lunch, what do you serve them? And of course,
Yeah.
we know lots of ideas, but most people, it's pretty limited. You have some kind of meat or some kind of sandwich deli slices, and that's just so typical, but it's not, it's not what we really want to see, because even years ago, so, we used to have, well, we have the My Plate guide that the USDA puts out. And the My Plate guide is based on the US dietary guidelines. And I don't think the US dietary guidelines say this right now, because they're always influenced by politics, sadly. But they used to say, maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago, they used to say, most of our calories should come from plants.
Mhm.
And they used to actually say that. Also, a long time ago, they used to say, only for about a month, I believe, they said, eat less meat. And then the meat industry kind of freaked out. And
Yeah.
then they ended up with eat leaner cuts of meat. That's where eat leaner cuts of meat came from. Because
Ah,
originally it said eat less. And so the bottom line is, when it said get most of your calories from plants, that was really spot on. And I mean, I'd rather see people get all of their calories from plants, but at least that recommendation was kind of definitely in the right direction. And so the school meal has a number, it has 5 different categories, which if anybody wants to sort of understand how school meals work, if they go look at our website, healthyschoolfood.org, and then they click on learn more, and then click on how school food works. So how school food works is that for a lunch, for example, they have to offer 5 components of food, and that includes a main dish, a vegetable, a grain, a fruit, and milk. They have to offer those 5 components, but for almost all schools, there's a few exceptions, but for almost all schools, students only have to take 3 of those 5. And one of those 3 must be a fruit or a vegetable. And so that's good. They have to be offered milk. They don't have to take the milk. They don't have to take the entree. But they do have to take 3 components. And so, because they do have to take 3, and another thing is that fruit, half the time, 100% fruit juice can count as a fruit. So for example, a meal could be a cheeseburger on a bun that's more than half white, and then with a carton of apple juice. So a food service director can serve a cheeseburger on a half white bun with a carton of 100% apple juice or orange juice, and that would count as a reimbursable meal. And unfortunately, many food service directors might think, well, it meets the regulations, so that's a healthy meal, even though it's not.
right.
So it is very possible, aside from the milk, which nobody has to take, it's very possible you could make a really healthy meal within the guidelines. So for example, the main dish entree part, okay, in the school food USDA language, they call that the meat/meat alternate. That's what that category is called. And in that category, you could have half a cup of beans, or half a cup of lentils, or 4.4 ounces of tofu, or 2 ounces of tempeh. And you could also have some of the plant-based meats, which I'm not a big fan of. I do think I would not call them healthy, but I would call them healthier, because if you just look at saturated fat and sodium, not so good. But then they don't have the known carcinogens that the
Right.
processed meats have. They don't have cholesterol. They do have a little bit of fiber. They don't have antibiotic residues, and they don't have added hormones. So, and they're much better for the environment. So
Right. Certainly
for me,
easier on the animals, right?
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So for me, it's like, are they, I wouldn't say they're a healthy food, but I would say relative to meat, they're healthier
Mhm.
and they're healthier for the planet.
Right.
Yeah, and certainly kinder to animals. And that's important too. So so I would say that although we don't really promote them so much, if a school wants to offer them and they ask for help, we will help them do that.
Mhm.
But we'd rather see the scratch made items. That's our preference. And one way we do that is by focusing on foods from different cultures from around the world. So, you know, there's Indian food, there's Chinese food, there's African, all different regions of Africa. There's Mexican food, you know, so there's all different foods from different places. And this is really great because we want kids, you know, are these foods actually authentic from those countries? No, because they're made here in a
Right.
food service environment, but they're inspired by those foods with
Right.
those flavors, and the kids really enjoy them. And
Right.
so it's a good way to learn more about cultures around the world that they may not be familiar with. And ultimately, in many of the times we've gone into the classrooms where we do recipe specific curriculum, also called Cool School Food in the Classroom. And Cool School Food has that cool food, you know, meaning about better for the planet.
Mm.
But also it's kind of cool because it's exciting to learn about cultures around the world. And so we show a slideshow with pictures from that culture. And what's really exciting is when you have a child who comes from that region of the world, or their parents do, and they tell us, and they see things in the slides that they can share with us. And or the recipe, like if we have a child whose parents come from India and we're having Mrs. Patel's Rajma,
Mm.
and they say, we have that at home, you know, we have that every week, we love that. And it's just great. It's really exciting. And it's a nice way to learn because, you know, we want to have all children know about various cultures. And so that's what's
Right.
really important. And food
Yeah,
is a great way to do that.
certainly a great way to introduce all kinds of things. You know, of course, you can use food to talk about math, but I don't think people consider that you can use food to talk about geography
Yeah.
or sociology, social studies, maybe in the school system, right? Diversity and inclusion and all kinds of fun stuff like that. Important. It's really important, really.
It
So
really is.
I have
And
another question.
sure.
Is we were talking a little bit. I think you started talking about how school food works. So in the rest of the country that hasn't had the epiphany that's happened in New York, and they're still struggling, you know, to try and, you know, how do you muddle through what's going on in school food? Can you tell us a little bit more about, like you were saying, everybody has to be offered milk, and there's the fruit and the vegetable, and then there's the meat or the meat alternate. Is that all that's required for
And
school
the
food?
grain.
And okay,
And the
great.
grain.
And the grain. And you said that has to that could be like a little more than half refined flour or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
well, there's a very confusing term called whole grain rich. And so it used to be that the food had to be 100% whole grain rich. But whole grain rich, that's the food industry. That whole grain rich actually means, I forget if it's 50 or 51% whole grain.
Okay.
So 100% whole grain rich actually means like about 50% whole grain. Well, then they reduced it to 50% whole grain rich, which really means right about 25% whole grain. And then during the Trump era, they weakened the standards, so they allowed less, even though 99% of the schools across the country were meeting the standards that were put into place in 2012. In 2015, I think it was, or 16, I think it was 2016, they weakened the standards and made it so they could have less whole grains. And then also there was a rule that flavored milk could only be skim milk. So it was sort of like if there was the extra calories from the extra sugar, that would be offset by the fact that it was lower fat. I think that's what their thinking was. And they weakened that standard, so they allowed it to be 1% fat milk and flavored. So they weakened a few, and they weakened the sodium standards as well. So those standards got weakened under Trump. And so we're still trying to get back to the stronger standards for whole grains, for milk, and for sodium.
Right.
But ultimately, the meal can be healthy, but it's oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes the kid, because the meat alternate component is almost always meat or cheese. It's really rare when it's not. And when it's not, then the most common thing would be peanut butter and jelly, or, could be sunflower butter or soy nut butter and jelly. That would be the most common option. Interestingly, peanut butter and jelly could be really healthy. Usually it's not, but it could be. If you had really healthy bread, peanut butter without added oil and sugar, jam without added sugar, right? You could have a very healthy peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You could. But I think as it's served in most schools, not necessarily, but it's still a lot better than the meat and the cheese.
Right.
So you're starting to see hummus more often. So because of our work with New York City has as an option hummus every day in all 1,700 schools.
How well received is that? Does it
The people love hummus. They partly love it because, I hate to say this, but they partly love it because they get a bag of pretzels with it, which would not be our ideal choice. In New York City, they get a bag of pretzels. In Ithaca, they get a soft pretzel, which is very appealing to the kids, those big pretzels.
Yes.
But they can also get carrot sticks or celery sticks with it too, usually. So it's great. It's great that they have, besides the peanut butter and jelly, that they have a second option every day. So every single day in New York City, kids can have peanut butter and jelly or hummus as their main dish. Now, our goal is to have more main dishes that are plant-based. So New York City has Meatless Monday. They also have, because in part due to our work with them and some others, Meatless Friday now. The goal behind Meatless Friday was that it would be vegan. And that was sort of pretty much a goal that was made right before the pandemic started, literally right before the pandemic. So that went on hold. But they still had it, and it had maybe less cheese. So it might have been like a bean burrito with a little cheese, instead of just a cheese sandwich, right? Or something like that. So no, I got to give them a lot of credit because they've done way more than other districts. There is still work to do, but they do have a huge list of banned ingredients in New York City, which I really like. So they're doing a lot of good work. But it's hard when you're doing almost 1 million meals a day to do that. But the fact that schools can opt into the vegetarian menu, now if it was up to us, it would be a vegan menu, but at least it's like moving in the direction of more vegan options on that menu.
Right.
So you mentioned that New York in particular has made a lot of these changes. Has there been one instrumental thing that has caused all of these changes in that particular area?
Well, I would say my organization. We haven't done it all on our own. Of course, we're working in partnership with the New York City Office of Food and Nutrition Services, who is in charge of the school meals. And in some cases, like the Meatless Friday, that was many of the partners saying, yes, let's do that. But it was due to our saying, we don't want to see cheese every Meatless Monday. And so we came up with this idea, like maybe on Fridays we could do something and maybe we could make that vegan. So, but others were involved with that. Others were involved with getting processed meat off the menu. But we were involved, especially Eric Adams, who's now the mayor of New York City. He's pushed on all these things. So we were pushing on all these things from the very beginning. And I think in some of these cases now, Mayor Adams helped push them over the edge, but we had been educating them about it and working on it for some time. And the hummus every day, that was us. The vegetarian menus were us, working in partnership with the Office of Food and Nutrition Services. But with now Mayor Adams, who is plant-based and reversed his diabetes, for anyone who doesn't know, he is the first plant-based mayor of New York City. And this is really exciting because he will be able to have some influence with the schools. And I know that the schools are excited about this because, they have somebody who is deeply concerned about kids' health, and they are too. So to have somebody to kind of help push it in the right direction is, it's a good thing. But New York City, they've always been way ahead of anybody, like in terms of all the things they do. They've been doing a lot of good things, but yet there's still a lot more to do too.
Yeah,
So
sounds like it. So I know you already kind of touched on this before or so far, but why do you feel that it's so important to change the food that we have currently in schools?
yes, such a loaded question. So many reasons. So like, why not, right? But well, for one thing, it's just the magnitude is huge. There are 7 billion, actually a little more than 7 billion meals served every year in the United States in schools. I'm talking breakfasts and lunches, multiplied by 180 days a year, it's more than 7 billion. But also because schools are the place where kids go to learn. Of course, they learn at home too, but schools are a place where students go to learn, and they should learn the life skills of healthy nutrition, because what if they're not learning it at home? Well, then at least they should be learning it at school. And for many children, they depend on the food at school as their main source of calories on school days. So I think it's really important to make sure, this should just be true in general anyway, but especially for those children, we want to make sure the food is health supporting and really sets them up for a lifetime of health, because that's really important, that we help people be healthy, grow healthy, so they can achieve, their best selves. And also you've got parents who are feeding their kids very healthy at home. There are those parents, and we don't want to undermine those parents either. And also, I don't know, some people might say this is kind of controversial, but it is our tax dollars that pays for the food. Why should that food be unhealthy? That our tax dollars also pay for this food. And so I don't think we want to be serving disease-causing foods to our kids. And I don't think, I think a lot of food service people don't know this, because they're very, very dedicated individuals who care deeply about the kids. But they may not know this, that processed meats, according to the World Health Organization, are actually group 1 carcinogens. That means they're known to cause cancer in humans. And we know this not just because the World Health Organization says it. They say it because there's thousands and thousands of medical journal articles that show this. And so that's sausage, deli meats, hot dogs, pepperoni,
Beef jerky.
Yeah.
bacon. And so these are things that can be on school menus. And why would we be paying for these foods that can cause cancer? And
You know,
so,
when you say that, Amy, I think about, I quote that statistic frequently to people who don't know. And I'll tell you, the number of people that don't know that far exceeds the number of people that do.
For sure.
So it, in a way,
Yeah.
it's surprising that school food service personnel have never heard that, in a way, but in a way not, because I think it's just a really well kept secret. It's a quiet fact, you know, that
yeah.
hasn't been publicized much at all.
Mhm.
Well, like I said, the school food service staff, the directors and all the staff, they really work so hard and they really care about the kids. They care about what they do. But to be a food service director, it's a whole range. You could have a person who's a registered dietitian, or you can have a person who never went to college. So there's like such a range of education. But most of the people, not all, but many of the people who stand behind the line and serve the food and interface with the kids, these jobs often pay $12 or $13 an hour, and that is just a crime. Like, they should be getting way more education and training and be paid more once they go into those jobs,
Mhm.
because that's not even a living wage anywhere.
Right.
And so really, I think a lot of the staff don't know these things, but it's not, but they do care. It's just that they don't necessarily know these things. So that's part of what we do, is try to educate them, because, you know, we want, you know, when we say, why is it so important to change the food served in schools? Well, let's set an example for the kids. They also develop their tastes when they're young. So if you can give them these foods when they're young, then they can develop a taste for it when they're young. And also, another reason for more plant-based foods is most people, almost everybody in this country, is not eating enough fiber. And of course, as you know, fiber is only found in plant foods, and actually beans and lentils are an excellent source of fiber. You know, like 15 grams of fiber for 1 cup, whereas maybe a piece of fruit has 5 grams or something. So
Right.
beans and lentils are fabulous. But what I have found out going into programs and talking to kids, especially the youngest kids, who are not embarrassed to say, when I ask them if they know what the word constipation means, and maybe they know, maybe they don't know, and then they find out, and then I say, who does that happen to? Raise your hand if that ever happens to you. And like all the hands go up, all of them.
Mhm.
It's
Mhm.
really rare when a hand doesn't go up. And you can ask this generally through 2nd grade. And then after that, you cannot talk about poop, you know, because it makes the kids laugh and they get embarrassed, and then it's, you're just all off track. But for the little ones, they might laugh about it too. But the bottom line is, what I have found out by asking this question is that most kids are constipated. And so they need more fiber. And so, yes, fruits and vegetables are on the school menu and some degree of whole grains, but it's not enough. It's really, we have to replace the meat and cheese with high fiber, healthy options.
Yeah. So let's go into the next part of this conversation, because of course, there you are, you're working to change the school food. And I love what you're describing, the feel good food cards and the wellness wake up call. That's like gorgeous stuff, right? Oh my gosh. What kind of challenges do you run into? So here's one thing that pops up for me, like a question I need answered, right? I hear that somewhere, I don't know if it's written in a law or is it a regulation or what, you're not allowed to make disparaging comments about certain food groups. Is that true?
It is. It is. Well, first, I'll just say the what you're talking about is milk. You are not allowed to in any way discourage milk. That's, you know, the regulations that are updated every 5 years, they can change like could the milk be 2% or 1% or skim?
Mhm.
That's a regulation. But the thing about no disparaging comments about milk, that's in the actual law part of it. And so it would literally take an act of Congress to change that. Plus, it would literally take an act of Congress to change the fact that milk must be offered. And the problem with this is that, the school meals are based on the US dietary guidelines. And also, the My Plate Guide is also based on the US dietary guidelines. And so there is racial discrimination in the US dietary guidelines. And I have testified about this very fact twice before the US Dietary Guidelines Committee in Washington, DC at the USDA building. And it's a real problem because, as I'm sure you know, and maybe many of the listeners know, that we're not, as mammals, we're not designed to continue digesting milk after we're weaned. We're really not supposed to be able to, we're not supposed to need to. And most people, the majority of the world's population cannot digest milk. The exception seems to be white people who have actually a genetic mutation that allows them to continue digesting it. But if you look at
Primarily
the
from
whole,
the Scandinavian areas, correct?
I'm not sure about that, but I just know that white people, like 80% of them have this genetic mutation, and then 20% are like everybody else and cannot digest milk. So I actually, when I became a vegetarian first, because I really didn't know about the suffering of cows and chickens for the dairy and eggs, I was a vegetarian for 10 years. This is like way back before internet, right? Percent plant-based after that, because it's funny. Years ago, when I was first eating this way, nobody wanted you to talk about animal suffering in schools. Interestingly, in New York State, we actually have a law from like over 100 years ago that requires humane education be taught. But sometimes people would act like if you said anything about the animals raised for food in schools, like hush, hush, don't talk about that. We can't have kids getting upset about the food they eat. And there's Ruby Roth, who wrote these books about vegan books for children, and they had some pretty hard realities in them. And there was this big thing in the New York Times about how she had this was too much for kids. And there was a well-known medical doctor who's sort of nationally known, and he wasn't even plant-based himself, but he said, or at the time he wasn't, I think he is now, but he said, if it's too upsetting for children to know what happens to animals, if it's too upsetting to be able to tell them the truth about what happens to animals, then maybe we shouldn't be eating them. So I found that really interesting.
Yeah.
But what I have found is over the years, more and more, we're not graphic, but more and more we can talk about animals a little bit. We can say, that eating this way, it's kinder to animals, or we could say animals are raised in very crowded conditions that aren't so nice for them, so we use age appropriate, but yeah, now it's not like this topic that you're not allowed to talk about. I think a lot of that comes from social media and just the population is aging, and the people who were saying that are getting older, and there's all these younger people who are much more open, even if they're not plant-based, maybe they're flexitarians, maybe they eat this way more often. They're just more open to it, I think. So I think the general population is shifting to more acceptance and an understanding that animal products are not healthy, they're harming the environment, and they're not kind to animals. And I think most people know that, and many people may choose to ignore it so they don't have to change their behavior. That's called cognitive dissonance.
Right.
But
right.
but at least nobody's giving us a hard time talking about it in schools. But we're very careful how we talk about it, because we don't want parents to get upset with the school. We don't want to not be invited back, so we're careful. but we can a little bit, so that's really good. So, so there is this racial discrimination in the US dietary guidelines, and then that spills over into the school meal programs, because even though the kids don't have to take it, it's one of the components. And a lot of times, well-meaning people in the cafeteria, usually the assistant teachers, come in with the kids and say, take your milk. Some of them think they have to take it even though they don't. So a lot of kids get forced to take it even though they don't have to according to the laws. And then they end up with belly aches or diarrhea or constipation, and then don't feel well, and then can't focus on their school work, or maybe they're in the nurse's office. So this really, it truly is because, I talked about how the people of the global majority really are mostly lactose intolerant, meaning they cannot digest milk. And if they have milk or cheese or other dairy, that it's going to make them not feel well. And we really don't want kids not feeling well in school. And so that is racial discrimination, and we hope to see those rules changed. But so that, to me, that's one of the biggest challenges. But there's other challenges too. Like, one of the biggest challenges is that schools, a lot of times, they want to offer kids many options. So say we've been successful in working with the school, and they now offer a healthy plant-based option, but they also offer 6 other options too. A bagel with cream cheese, a bagel with melted cheese, a chicken fajita, pizza with pepperoni. They might have 5, 6, 7 different options, plus our healthy plant-based option. Well, when you have all those different options, kids are going to go for what they're used to and what's most appealing. But what we have, and so that's a problem. So because it means even in the schools that are offering this healthy food, maybe not the highest percentage of kids are taking it, even if it tastes really great. But what we found was, we worked with this one school in New York City, and this was quite a long time ago, but we worked with this one school, and the kids would there'd be one hot meal. There was one hot meal, that's what you were getting, and you either got that, and if you didn't want that, you could have a melted cheese sandwich or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But you had to ask for them. Otherwise, you just had to take the tray that they put out for you. And they made it so you could not see the sandwiches. So they weren't right there for the kids to grab or even see. So they would have to know, they would have to ask for it. So we would see in that school, probably 95% of the kids eating, in this case, I remember particularly the North African vegetable stew, which was so delicious, like collard greens, chickpeas, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, and 95% of the kids took that because that's what was offered, and they didn't see the other options. But it wasn't just that they took it, they were all actually eating it, because it's like being at home. This is what we're having for dinner, right? Not like you have 7 choices. This is what we're having for dinner tonight. So I feel like if they would do that, I know a lot of schools don't want to do that. Either that or make 5 or 6 choices, but make them all plant-based and healthy.
Right.
Right. So,
right.
but I have seen that the kids will eat and enjoy and actually eat it, not just take it, but actually consume it. I've seen that happen. So I know it works. So the too many options is often a big challenge. And then the other challenges are really maybe not enough labor in some cases, lack of training, not enough budget, or kids who aren't used to healthy whole foods because they've been growing up on a diet of processed foods. So those are some of the challenges that exist.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you see ways to overcome some of these challenges? I know you've mentioned a couple already.
Well, part of it is all the education that we do with the adults and the students. So that's a big part of it. Because especially when the adults understand the reasons why for themselves, for their own sake, they want to eat healthier, then all of a sudden they're starting to realize, hey, we want better for our kids too. Mm-hmm. We don't want them, with 70% of the US population overweight or obese. they might be thinking, and then if you go into food service department, well, the people who work in there, they reflect the general population. So the majority of them are overweight or obese. Maybe they have high blood pressure or high cholesterol or type 2 diabetes. And maybe they're thinking, you know what, now I learned this. Now I understand why this organization wants to get these plant-based foods on the menu. Now, like, I really understand and I do want better for the kids. So because they're following the regulations, they don't realize they might not be feeding the healthiest food. So education is really key. And then, of course, work to change the laws and the regulations. And then I think one other thing that would be really useful is more healthy plant-based manufactured foods, because not all schools can do scratch cooking. But if they could have more frozen healthy plant-based foods that they could just purchase, heat and serve, that would certainly be really helpful as well.
We would like to know, were you raised vegan or whole food plant-based, or was that some change you made? And if it was a change you made, what turned the tide for you?
Wow, what a question. So no, I was not raised whole food plant-based or vegan. My mom, when I was 19, my mom got the job as the director of the local SPCA, the animal shelter. Back before there was computers and social media, back before there was spay, neuter, and adoption campaigns. So 90% of the animals that went in, they never came out. They were killed at the shelter.
Right.
And my mom had just gotten the job and inherited this horrible way of killing the animals, which was a decompression chamber.
Mm.
And this was, deeply, deeply disturbing. I do not know what possessed me, but I was there. And it's a machine with a window on it. And I don't know what possessed me to watch, but I watched. And so I watched, I don't know, 7 or 8 dogs die all at once. And then they die, and then they come out of this machine and they get thrown in a furnace to be cremated. And it was horrifying. And I just had this sudden realization, those animals suffered. And it was needless. It was because people were careless and thoughtless and didn't take care of their companion animals. And it was just so deeply upsetting to see these dogs die. And in that moment, I realized when I ate animals, that animals were dying, had to die.
How old were you?
I was 19. I was in college, and I was home from college when I saw this happen, but I had no idea about dairy and eggs. I did not know about that yet. I did not know about that for 10 more years. Like I said, there was no internet. There was no health food stores where I was. And so, so that's what made me vegetarian. And then 10 years later, I was living in the Detroit, Michigan area. There was a couple of health food stores. So I started going in those, and I just walk around and look at all these different strange ingredients like tempeh and miso and things I had never heard of, which I regularly eat now. And there was this rack with these magazines, Vegetarian Times magazine. And in that magazine, and we're talking like 1986 or 80.
Yes.
It's actually 1989. And there was this magazine, Vegetarian Times, with an article called "What About Dairy and Eggs" by my friend Victoria Moran, the Main Street Vegan, prolific author. And I read and was horrified. So I went vegan right away. So because I had no idea. So when I did find out, I did not want to eat dairy or eggs anymore. So that is how I became vegan. That's when I was 29. I do have a daughter who's actually turning 20 tomorrow, and she has been raised vegan her whole life. And so I'm really glad there's a whole bunch of kids now who've been raised vegans their whole life at this point. Yeah. Pretty exciting.
And when you mentioned going into the health food store or the co-op or whatever and seeing the rack of magazines and all. As you're describing that, that was my experience as well, right? About the same age. And I could literally smell what that store smelled like when I walked
Wow.
in, like that, the smell, right? Like there's the
Yeah.
rack of herbal teas over here, right? They're all
Yeah.
in big glass jars. And at least that was our co-op. And then there was wheels of cheese that we used to cut by hand when I would work the co-op. That was one of my jobs, is to cut this huge wheel of cheddar cheese. Yeah, that's funny. Or the Celestial Seasonings tea
Yeah.
before they started doing strange things to it. I don't know if they sold out to Coca-Cola or something, but they've changed their formulas. But back then there was, just amazing. That's so funny that you were your description just brought that back so clearly. That's great.
Yeah, I also remember going to some sort of macrobiotic dinner at somebody's house, and everybody in their house, it was different rooms, but you could go around in a circle. So there's a big circle and everybody's holding hands and, saying some sort of blessing on the meal. And I just thought, I don't know how I ended up there. And it just, at the time, it felt like the strangest thing to me. But I will say that my very dear friends, Priscilla Timberlake and Louis Friedman, who wrote the Great Life Cookbook, which is a vegan, gluten-free cookbook based on dinners they held pre-pandemic for 25 years at their home on Friday nights. It's such a wonderful sense of community. And we would all hold hands and say blessings on the meal, and it was, and it's so funny because by the time I got there, by the time I started going to those dinners, once I moved to Ithaca, it's like, it didn't seem strange to me at all. But I remember back when I was 29, it seemed like just like I was in some strange kind of world that is
that
not
was
at all
pleasant.
strange to
It was a
me.
pleasant world, right? It was just
It was
different.
the people very nice, but the food was very different from what I was used to. And it was a whole different scene. And it was really, that was the beginning for me of really a whole new eye-opening lifestyle, really. And so it was really a good experience that I'm glad I had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So
thanks for sharing that with us.
that's how I became vegan. But then I was vegan for a long time, and I was a chubby vegan, maybe like 20 pounds overweight, and maybe even 30 pounds overweight at the very most. And I knew the whole time exactly what I had to do about it, but didn't do it. And I would say the reason is that I had food addictions, and really, truly, like sugar, you can be addicted to it, like a drug. And I know that I can't eat it because it triggers me to want to eat. But I knew when I cut out the oil and when I cut out the sugar, then I lost the weight and became a normal weight without problem, and eating more than ever before, which everybody who is whole food plant-based knows that. But anybody who's listening who doesn't eat a whole food plant-based diet, this is a healthy vegan diet that includes no oil, no added sweeteners, no refined grains, no artificial ingredients. There's some more things I'm not including, and it's not restrictive. It's really not. Like, the variety of foods that you can have are just amazing. And I feel so happy when I eat. I feel so satisfied, and I don't feel hungry. All the cravings are completely gone. And so I became whole food plant-based pretty much completely 2 years ago, just before the pandemic started.
Okay.
2 years ago this month, when I did the Eat Plants Love 10-day challenge.
Okay. All right.
That didn't necessarily restrict the high-fat plant foods. And so then later I did the Rochester Lifestyle Medicine very low-fat plant-based challenge, and that helped me lose the weight. But I'm very happy about it, because I will say that not only do I feel physically better, I feel mentally so much better, happier, more joy. And a lot of people don't realize, I mean, of course, we all have reasons to be sad or anxious, but how well you cope with that can be dependent on the food you eat. And then sometimes you don't have a reason to feel that way, but you do feel that way because your brain just isn't functioning right, because it's not getting the nutrients it needs. And so I am a real advocate of whole food, plant-based, not only for your physical health, but for your mental well-being as well. And I know
Right.
I experienced that really quite a bit myself,
Yeah.
that I could feel the difference in a major way.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Definitely.
great, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. That's a great story.
So if our listeners want to know more about what you're involved in, how can they find you?
Well, they can go to our website, healthyschoolfood.org. And then I especially want to direct people to the Learn More section, where it talks about how school food works, all the regulations.
Mhm.
And then there's another section, Create Change, and then there's Create Change in My School. So we are here to help people. So if you want to create change in your school, I can't just snap my fingers and make it happen. It really depends on me working with you, the listeners, to be a liaison and find out who in the school district cares about this issue and approaching them first. And then, working can't necessarily make all the changes you want right away, but essentially we can help you, we can guide you to help get these changes in your school. We are a small nonprofit, yet we have accomplished a tremendous amount. And that's because of support from people who make donations. And so we do need donations. We love it when people do the recurring every month, because then you can donate a little bit every month, but it adds up. So that's nice. We need volunteers of all kinds. We need marketing volunteers, advertising volunteers, human resources volunteers, like practically anything you do, we could use your skills. We need translators. We're about to put on a series of online presentations, like one per month between now and May. And we're going to have translators. So it's going to be in English, Spanish, and Chinese. So we need translators.
Mhm.
We have the Spanish translators. We may or may not have the Chinese translators. So we especially would like somebody who's knowledgeable about plant-based eating and nutrition, so that we make sure they're translating correctly,
Mhm. Right. Right.
because
Right. The
little,
sensitivity. Yeah.
yeah. So, but any kind of skill you have, if you're interested in volunteering with us, we can find projects for you. Or if you're interested in volunteering in your own school district, we can help you do that too, to create change. So those are, volunteers and financial support are the big ways.
All right.
That's
Perfect.
great. Yeah.
If there was one thing that you would recommend to our listeners that they could do right now to make a difference, what would you say that would be?
I would say, and it's going to be hard, but I would say try to see if you could have a meeting, a remote Zoom meeting or whatever, with the food service director of your local school district, and talk to them, and don't tell them anything. Just ask some questions. Ask, what are their challenges? What's difficult? Do they offer any plant-based main dish options? Or if not, would they be interested in it? But it's not just like the person at your child's school. You need to specifically reach out to the food service director, who's the decision maker for the food in the district. I would think trying to understand them. Right now, though, it's hard because they have supply chain problems, they have staffing problems. So it's like, or even just send them an email and say thank you, and say, this is like what you're interested, but right now they are overwhelmed, but like, if they're interested and want to talk about it sometime, you're there, and would be willing to help when they're ready.
Yeah.
Because even though the healthier we can feed, the healthier we can be, the better our immune systems are, and it's not a substitute for a vaccination and proper mask wearing. It's not a substitute for those things, but certainly the research has shown that vegans are faring better when they do get COVID. And so, for example, it's really unfortunate because right now it would be the perfect time, and yet it would also be to some extent insensitive because they're on just massive overload, working under
Right.
really difficult circumstances. But one place you could send them, last but not least, is we worked together with Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, and we created a booklet which can be viewed online. And it's healthyschoolfood.org/COVID booklet.
Okay, wait a minute. Hold on. I believe I have it here. This one?
That is it, healthyschoolfood.org/COVID booklet. You can look at the PDF there. And it really talks about, why these healthy plant-based foods are important now. It's got some of our quantity recipes in it. It talks about other health issues. But I think ultimately introducing ourselves, letting the food service director know who we are, they're our hero, thank you, certainly don't criticize them in any way, and say you're interested in plant-based foods, but right now might not be the time, but like if you are at any point, like please reach out to you and you can hook them up with this other group, us, and we could all work together. So I think that is maybe one of the most important things people can do, and let those food service directors know you're thinking of them, you care about them, they're working so hard, and thank you for the work they're doing.
Great, excellent, great suggestion. Yeah. Well, do you have anything else you'd like us to share with our audience?
I am really excited to know you both, and I'm really excited about the work that you're doing. And I think together, there can't be enough people doing this work. So I encourage anybody who wants to get involved to get involved. And this is, if you look at some of the statistics on our, like on the Why Change School Food section of our website, some of the statistics, more than 50% of kids between the ages of 2 and 15 already have fatty streaks in their arteries.
Yes, we were looking, yes.
1/3 of all kids in this country are going to end up with type 2 diabetes at some point in their lives. And if you're just looking at Latino kids or African American kids, then you're talking between 40 and 53%. That is horrifying. It's just so wrong on so many levels. And we really have to do something about this. We can't keep going on this trajectory of what's happening to our health. It's why healthcare is so expensive, because most of the healthcare expenses are because of things we do to ourselves, like what we put in our mouth, or if we smoke, or if we don't exercise, so it's just really important to take care of ourselves, and in doing so, we will feel a lot better.
Yes.
In so many ways.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Amie Hamlin, for just sharing everything that you have been able to share, all your wisdom and experience and your great stories. It's phenomenal. We are so looking forward to teaming up with you and the Coalition for Healthy School Food for the next steps, and to make the world a healthier place for our kids, and the world a healthier place as a planet in general.
Yes.
So we will definitely.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, we will be like this.
Can't wait to work together in the future. Yeah,
for sure.
Thank you, Meryl and Carrie, so much. Thank you for this opportunity.
Welcome.
It's so nice to speak with you.
Yeah, so nice, so nice. We will be in touch. 6 Billion Seeds is made possible by the generosity of Bruno Chiropractic, Acme Construction Metals, EXP Realty, and Deck It Out builders. We thank you for your support.